Welcome to this deep dive. It's especially relevant, I think, for those of you tracking daily current affairs for your UPSC exams.
For sure.
Today, we're tackling something pretty central to Indian democracy, the Election Commission's initiative to link Aadhaar with voter IDs.
Right, and it's more than just a process change, isn't it? It really digs into some fundamental constitutional, legal, ethical questions, too.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the arguments around this linkage. We're drawing on some analysis to give you a clearer picture, beyond just the headlines.
And we should mention the main source we're looking at today is a detailed analysis from The Hindu, focusing specifically on the concerns raised.
Great. Okay, let's jump in. The ECI says linking Aadhaar to your voter ID is voluntary. That's the official line.
But that's where the first point of friction really comes up.
How so?
Well, while they say voluntary, the way it's implemented, you either have to give your Aadhaar number or you have to specifically declare you don't have one.
So it feels less like an option and more like you have to engage with the odd question one way or another.
Precisely. It can feel a bit coercive in practice. The key takeaway here is that this voluntary label might be masking a sort of pressure, especially on maybe more vulnerable people.
And they've made quite a bit of headway already, haven't they? I read something like over 66 crore Aadhaar numbers were already seeded by late 2023.
That's right, a huge number. And it makes you wonder how voluntary it really felt to get that many linked up.
How did they manage that scale?
Well, this is interesting. It seems tools like the DBT seeding data viewer, which was really meant for government benefits and even data from the National Population Register.
Which is more like a census tool.
Exactly. That data seems to have been repurposed, which definitely raises questions about, whether the original consent covered this kind of use. It's a bit of mission creep, perhaps.
Using data collected for one thing for something quite different. Okay, now connect this to the legal side. I remember the ECI gave assurances before.
Yes, that's crucial. In the G. Naranjan case back in 2023, the ECI explicitly told the Supreme Court that this linkage wouldn't be mandatory.
Okay, so they made a commitment to the highest court.
They did. But this current policy? Well, it seems to run counter to that assurance, doesn't it?
How specifically?
Because now if you don't provide your Aadhaar, you're apparently required to go in person before an electoral registration officer and explain why.
In person? Wow, that sounds like a significant burden.
It really does. Think about the elderly, or people with disabilities, migrant workers who might be far from their registered address, people in remote areas.
Making them jump through that hoop could effectively disenfranchise them just through procedure.
That's the major concern. It creates a barrier. And what's more, there doesn't seem to be a clear sort of quick way to appeal if your justification is rejected.
No clear appeal process. That sounds problematic.
It leaves people potentially without recourse if they're removed or can't register because they couldn't meet this requirement.
Okay, let's talk about the main reason given for this whole exercise. Purifying the electoral rolls. Getting rid of duplicate voters. Sounds sensible on the surface.
It does sound logical at first glance. Clean up the lists, ensure one person, one vote. But the tool they're using, Aadhaar, isn't actually designed for that purpose. This is fundamental. Aadhaar proves residency, where you live.
Not citizenship.
Exactly. It doesn't prove citizenship, which is the actual requirement to vote in India.
And that's not just an interpretation, right? For our UPSC listeners, that's grounded in law.
Absolutely. Section 9 of the Aadhaar Act itself says it's not proof of citizenship. Courts have repeatedly confirmed this distinction, too.
So the law is clear on that point.
It is. And even the UIDAI, the authority that issues Aadhaar, admits that people who aren't citizens but live in India legally can get an Aadhaar number.
So using Aadhaar to verify voter eligibility could actually introduce errors, let non-citizens onto the rolls, potentially.
It could paradoxically undermine the integrity it's meant to protect. You're using a residency document to check a citizenship requirement. It's a mismatch.
That seems like a huge flaw in the core logic. Has this kind of mismatch caused problems before? Is there evidence?
Yes, unfortunately. There was a pilot program back in 2015, the National Electoral Roll Purification and Authentication Program, or NERP.
Right, I remember hearing about that in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana.
That's the one. They used Aadhaar linking extensively, and the outcome was, quite alarming. Over 55 lakh voters were reportedly deleted from the rolls.
55 lakh? Why?
Often due to mismatches between the Aadhaar data and the voter data. Simple errors, name spelling differences, things like that.
And people found out.
Many found out only when they showed up to vote on Election Day and discovered their names weren't on the list. A direct consequence of relying on a system not built for this.
That's a shocking number and a terrible experience for citizens. Okay, moving beyond accuracy, what about privacy? Linking these huge databases must raise red flags.
Huge red flags. Combining detailed voter information with the Aadhaar database, which is linked to so many other services, it opens the door to potential mass surveillance and detailed voter profiling.
And we do have data protection laws now, like the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. Do they help here?
Well, yes and no. The act exists, but it also contains significant exemptions for government bodies.
So the government might be able to access and use this linked data in ways a private company couldn't.
That's the concern. The potential for misuse of this very sensitive, combined data set for political targeting or advantage is quite real, given those exemptions.
How might that misuse look in practice?
Imagine being able to cross-reference voting data with, say, welfare scheme databases or other government interactions linked via Aadhaar.
Yeah.
You could build incredibly detailed profiles of voters.
Which could then be used for micro-targeting ads or something worse.
It could enable very sophisticated micro-targeting, yes, but also potentially voter suppression, identifying groups likely to vote against the incumbent and making it harder for them, maybe through selective challenges or deletions from the rolls. It could even facilitate direct manipulation.
And who controls this data matters too, right?
Right.
Where does the linked data actually sit?
That's another critical point. The electoral data, traditionally under the Election Commission, a constitutional body meant to be independent, could effectively become accessible or managed via systems linked to UIDI.
And UIDI is under executive control.
Yes, it's a statutory body under the government. So you risk blurring the lines, potentially compromising the ECI's independence, and eroding that crucial separation of powers between the electoral body and the executive.
So we're potentially linking voter rolls to a database, Aadhaar, that has its own issues.
Exactly. We shouldn't assume Aadhaar itself is a perfect database. The Controller and Auditor General, the CAG, did an audit released in 2022.
And what did they find?
They found significant problems. Things like hundreds of thousands of duplicate Aadhaar numbers issued, IDs issued based on faulty biometric data, issues with the process for verifying residency within Aadhaar itself.
So the foundation we'd be building this voter verification on is itself known to be flawed.
It has documented flaws, yes, which makes relying on it for something as critical as electoral roll purity quite risky.
This suggests maybe we should be focusing on improving the methods we already have rather than introducing this new, potentially problematic linkage.
That seems like a very strong argument. Investing in the established, proven methods makes a lot of sense.
Like what specifically?
Like rigorous door-to-door verification by the booth-level officers, the BLOs. They're the ground-level staff who know the local area.
Right, actual human verification.
Yes. Plus, conducting independent audits of the electoral rolls regularly and making sure there are strong, accessible grievance mechanisms for the public if they spot errors or omissions.
You also mentioned something called social audits earlier.
Yes, that's another powerful tool. Getting the community directly involved in verifying voter lists publicly. It adds a layer of transparency and can really help prevent politically motivated deletions or additions.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This push to link Aadhaar and voter IDs. It's not straightforward.
Not at all. The claim it's voluntary seems shaky in practice. It potentially goes against assurances given to the Supreme Court.
And it puts a real burden on vulnerable groups, risking their right to vote.
Plus, the core logic is flawed, using a residency proof for a citizenship check. We've seen that go wrong before.
And then there are the big concerns about privacy, surveillance, and political misuse of data.
Absolutely. The potential for profiling, the risk to the ECI's independence by involving UIDI and the executive, it's significant.
Especially when you consider the Aadhaar database isn't perfect itself, and we have other, arguably better, ways to ensure clean rolls.
Exactly. When you weigh it all up, this linkage could be seen as, well, a constitutional misstep with potentially serious negative consequences for the right to vote and the health of our electoral process.
So for you, our listener, particularly those of you deep in UPSC prep, wrestling with these nuances is key. The big question this leaves us with is,
Hmm.
Given all these potential pitfalls, what are the best constitutionally sound ways to genuinely ensure our electoral rolls are accurate and robust? How do we strengthen democracy's foundations effectively?
That's the critical question to ponder. It's a complex balancing act with deep implications.
Definitely food for thought and crucial for understanding governance issues for mains and maybe even prelims.
Indeed, a very multifaceted issue.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you found this discussion useful, especially for your exam preparation, please do hit like, subscribe, and maybe drop a comment if you have questions for us.
And just to reiterate, the core analysis we discussed today was drawn primarily from reporting in the Hindu. Worth checking out if you want more detail.
Thanks again for listening.